Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the October meeting of Leeds Council Executive Board. And I'll start with, first of all, welcoming Councillor Ryan Stevenson, as Councillor Andrew Carter has submitted his apologies for today, and as such, Councillor Stevenson is here in a non-voting capacity. And also, Councillor Mary Harland has submitted apologies for today as well. I'm going to turn to the items at the top of the agenda, and the first one is behind me. This worked brilliantly in rehearsal this morning.
Appeals, Chair.
The first one is appeals against refusal of inspection of document. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. To confirm, there's been no appeals received for today's meeting.
That's great. Are there any exempt information, please?
Yes, Chair. Should the board be agreeable, then Appendix A to Agenda Item 9, which is the Core Business Transformation Programme, designated as being exempt from publication under provisions of Access to Information Procedure Rule 10.43, will be considered in private at the conclusion of the public part of the meeting.
Thank you. Are there any late items, please?
No late items of business today, Chair, no.
Thank you. And I'll turn to the board to see if there's any declarations of interest. I don't see any. Turn to item 5 and minutes to confirm that the minutes of the meeting from the 21st of September were correct. Everybody's happy with those. That's great. We're on to our first portfolio, which is Councillor Cooper, please, and item 6.
Thank you, Leader. And the first of my items is the monthly reporting of the financial health monitoring of the organisation. And as last month, obviously, we were reporting some issues around overspend within the organisation on the budget that we set back in February. I agreed to bring further detail to this executive board on the action that we're taking to bring those directorate overspends back into balance by the end of the year. So the report does have some of those detail that we've worked on already, and at the next executive board and following ones, I'll continue to bring further updates on that work. There is the report does project an overspend of just over £20 million in the directorate pressures, which are detailed within the report. The budget also still assumes the savings that we set out, £16.5 million on the directorate savings plans. I think that it is well documented as to why there may be, we are in uncertain financial times at the moment. Everybody's certainly aware when you turn your TV on and the news on at the moment, it's not just in Leeds that we're experiencing financial pressures. But it's certainly nationally, and that organisations and public bodies are under such financial pressure at the moment. Really, to the items that are affecting us mostly at the moment are the costs of energy, of the inflationary rate that I understand has increased again this morning to 10.1%. And the pay award, which we didn't budget for all of that pay award, if indeed it is accepted by the members of our staff. So I'll leave it there for now, Leader, and take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thank you. Just on the obviously, children and families is, as ever, the huge pressure that we see. There's reference in terms of savings on little owls nurseries. Is there a time scale when those proposals are going to come forward in more detail?
Victoria, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're currently working with the Directorate and looking at the proposals around the little owls. It will be coming it'll be coming to executive board in November or December, but it will be before Christmas on the proposals around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yeah, just to add to what Victoria said, I thought it was important actually that we brought the proposed savings to this executive board in terms of the financial health monitoring, even if we're waiting for some of the detail around timing and other matters as well. Because executive board members did express the need to see them at the earliest possible point. So I think we've done that. We've brought it early enough so that, you know, we are being transparent about what we're looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just want to follow up that sentiment is agreed, that what has come forward is very useful in terms of the level of detail that's been offered, and it should augur well for the savings proposals that come from the different departments in December. In particular, I think it's really encouraging that, given all the different departments in the council's different responsibilities have pressures of their own, they are now handing out their professional expertise to other parts of the council where their savings priorities might be in an area which isn't one of their natural strengths, such as the expansion of the residential care aspect for us here in Leeds for the children. I'm looking forward to that report coming forward, showing how the development department has enabled delivery of that to be progressed. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Well, thanks for acknowledging the work that's happening across council to actually try and deal and tackle with the problem that we're facing in such difficult financial challenging circumstances. And I'd just like to say thanks to the directors and their teams for the work that they are progressing around trying to bring in a balanced budget by the end of the year, and also looking at next year's really difficult horizon in setting those savings as well.
Tom, please.
Yeah, I was just going to reinforce the point that the paper and Councillor Cooper have made around this affecting the whole sector, and having recently been in regional and national meetings, I think the pressures that we're experiencing are very consistent across, I think particularly cities and urban areas, but actually across the whole sector. And it's one that we're trying to work together on, you know, across parties through the LGA and also through the networks that we've got, to make sure that the decisions that are being made in the next few weeks nationally take into account the challenges that, you know, the sector has got generally. So I thought it was worth just reiterating that and reinforcing it.
Thanks, Tom. So I don't see anybody else wanted to speak on this item, so I will turn to the recommendations on page 28, and I take it that the board is happy with those, so we will move on to item 7, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next item is also on the organisation's finances, but looking further forward to next year, and indeed the medium-term financial plan. This report contains the first directorate savings proposals for the 3-year period, with further options being presented to December Executive Board. The initial options that we've brought forward currently are all the business as usual, and can be implemented within the council's process under the consultation framework. The report notes the increase in the budget gap of £26.5 million to £150 million over the next 3 years. That was published in September's medium-term financial strategy. More than half of this is relating to next year's budget. So against this, the business as usual saving proposals for October amount to 11.3 million for 23-24. And they are also detailed within the report and the appendices that you see. We've spoken to scrutiny chairs, and they've also agreed, as we've done for the last couple of years, to have working groups, set up working groups to review all of the savings proposals relevant to them following the publication of the exec board papers. And I think that dates and times are yet to be confirmed on that, but suffice to say that we're working with scrutiny and being as open and transparent as we can around these proposals and difficult savings proposals that may well come, not just today, but in the next coming months, that we will have to look at with such a financial gap facing us.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this paper, please? Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered if there had been any risk assessment done at the level of the Leeds City Council corporate body potentially eating itself by the amount of savings proposals here that involve basically raising internal charges from one department of the council to another, or between Leeds City Council and West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and that the actual sum gain is just less public services being delivered because they become too costly for each department to deliver. So that's the first question. And the second one is the street lighting consumption saving in the development department's proposals. I'd like a little bit more detail on that, if that's okay, Chair, because I know that I would have thought that the energy savings would have been incorporated within budgets, but it feels like they're coming in as a bit of a windfall. And it really is good news if, with all of the price increases that we've got at the moment for electricity, that we're still able to have a nice surprise in terms of the costs for lighting our streets. So a bit more detail would be useful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Victoria, please.
Shall I take the first one and Martin take the second one? So the first one around the internal charges, they are all reviewed to ensure that we're still achieving value for money, but it is reasonable that we do recharge on the increases from pay and price inflation, as would do any private sector organisation. So it is reasonable that we do that to reflect the true cost of those services. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, members will recall that we brought a business case forward in terms of transferring to LED lights across our street lighting portfolio that had a forecast level of savings within it. This represents the final year, and we know from the previous years what that has meant in terms of consumption. So that's why we're able to bring forward that extra additional forecast of 190,000 as we complete that LED transition in the final year.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, please.
Yeah, sorry, just as a supplementary. So I would have thought that given the increase in the price of electricity, that we would have been getting less profit. Do you see what I mean? Because we're still going to consume the same amount of electricity, but it was on a much lower price when the profits were calculated in the original proposal. So I'm surprised that it's stayed the same then.
Martin, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I can get you a detailed note on that for if you want to examine it further, Councillor Galton, but this relates to the forecast reduction in consumption as a consequence of the LEDs, and that they are more efficient in terms of the energy that they utilise. So it's that forecast that it counts for.
Thank you, Martin, and for the offer of a more detailed briefing. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thanks. Two questions. First of all, have we done anything to quantify the cost of absenteeism across the council, and if so, what is it? And in terms of the proposals, I know there's other directorates yet to come forward, but just on city development, clearly making savings in demand-led directorates is difficult enough, but obviously city development is the income generation side for council largely. So at what point do we hit the brick of sort of having hollowed it out too far that you're cutting off your nose to spite your face as such?
Thank you. Neil, would you like to come in on the first question, please?
Yes, so we have done some work on quantifying costs, which I don't have to hand, but I can share later. The absence does kind of fall in different categories, I suppose, in that actually in certain areas it has to be covered by overtime and agency, where actually staffing levels have to be maintained. And then in other areas, obviously, it tends to be absorbed by other staff who actually are present. So there's a sort of actual cost which we are putting out, which we can quantify fairly easily. The other one is a productivity cost, which is less, I suppose, easily quantifiable, but we can give you an indication of how trends have gone over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Neil. Tom, please.
The point about city development, I think, is one of the central, if you like, dilemmas and issues that we have to deal with in setting the budget overall. And I think the overall approach of the council in terms of trying to grow the economy and, have a consistent level of, appropriate house building in the city means that over a long period, we get an increase in council tax base and we get an increase in business rates base as well. And Martin's department sort of supports that from a council perspective. And it's important that we recognise that and that continues. More particularly, we do get right into the detail with Victoria's help of, where there are income generating elements of what the council does. We have tried very hard to protect that and to recognise that it's a false economy, as you say, to cut that back too much. But the brick wall feels like it's it feels as hard as it has done in terms of making those balances between demand pressures and the economic ones. And we just will. That goes back to the point about where the overall settlement lands and the flexibility that we have when we set the budget later in the year. But we're doing everything that we can, I think, to strike that balance in the right way, and look at the net budget, not just the cash cost of everything.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to officers for answering some of that. But I do feel I need to come in at this point and just say that to add to what Tom said about it feeling the hardest it's felt, it couldn't be truer. And I feel actually that we have hit a brick wall already. We've already cumulatively had £2.3 billion taken out of our core budget. And it gets to a point where there is no more fat to cut. There is no more fat in public service at Leeds City Council to cut, because we've been suffering austerity and a loss of proper funding for public service and local authorities for over 12 years now. And that's a choice that this government made back in 2010. And that has continued under whoever is dressed up as Prime Minister at this time, or whoever, those Prime Ministers have been. They have continued to cut public services, not just local authority, but all other public bodies as well. West Yorkshire Police, for instance, the funding impacts they've had on cuts as well. West Yorkshire Fire, we could go on and on. But ourselves, as an organisation, Leeds City Council, £2.3 billion taken out of the purse. Well, I'd say we've hit the wall already.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there any more comments on this paper? Okay, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 69, and I take it everybody is happy with those. That's great, and we'll move on to item 8, please.
Thank you, Leader. Item 8 is the Leeds City Digital Strategy. The strategy has been written following extensive consultation that has included a number of workshops, some of which were open to the public to attend, discussion at scrutiny boards and a wide variety of organisations across the city, including those in the third sector. It has been written for the city perspective as opposed to a council one, with the objective of encouraging other key players to contribute to its delivery. Firstly, the strategy focuses on getting the digital foundations right in data management and use, connectivity and infrastructure, digital inclusion, digital skills, digital and data ethics. Next, it takes person-centred approach and uses the life course model adopted by the Best City Ambition to outline how digital can support people at each stage of their life to start well, living and ageing well and working well. Executive Board is requested to support the approach being outlined in the digital strategy and the transformation approach and the innovation programme and approve the strategy and agree it can be published. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Galton, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's a very good paper, and it highlights what the benefits are to make sure that as many of the Leeds citizens are digitally cognizant. I come from a generation which either really gets it or really doesn't. And I'm afraid I'm in the really doesn't category, and I need enabling quite often on my digital equipment. But one of the things that I do recognise as I look at these different strategies, whether it's here or at West Yorkshire Combined Authority as well, is we keep talking about how digital is the future, how it's going to be one of the key areas where we will build our economy and where we need to enable it to happen in terms of providing the innovation district, for instance. That's all about digital and whatever. But whenever I visit a digital company that is meant to be the future, it always appears to me to be quite middle class and of a certain diversity quotient, shall we say. So I appreciate that the delivery of health is much better delivered through making sure that people can access apps so that they can control their own health. And there's a lot of that in here. What I'd like to see more of is how we take our theories about inclusive growth and turn it into reality in terms of us having assurance that our digital focus also brings benefits to not just people coming into the city because they think it's digitally very well connected, but also for those people already in the city to be able to make their living in the digital world. And I didn't see that in this paper, but it might be somewhere else.
Neil, please.
Well, maybe comment on part and then maybe ask Martin or Eve, I think was at the back, to say something as well about the skills side of things, and Tom's very good view. So I think on the digital inclusion in terms of the public, we do actually have a dedicated team done lots of work, award-winning work, to actually bring people to digital who would otherwise not be able to afford it or not have the skills to actually use it. And you know, I think that's been, you know, award-winning in parts, and we want to kind of continue with that, because I don't think the answer is to avoid digital, but to actually bring people to it. But on the skills side, I think we've also been doing a lot of work in terms of forming academies and ways through for people to enter into digital who would previously maybe not fitted the profile that you've talked about before, but Tom and Eve know more about those things than I do. Tom, did you want to? Yeah.
Thank you. Eve, please.
So hello, my name's Eve Reedhouse. I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy. Just we launched recently our Future Talent Plan, which is our approach to making sure that we support people and businesses in Leeds with the right skills to thrive going forwards. And there was a big element of that related to digital skills. And off the back of that, we've been doing a huge amount of work to showcase the opportunities that exist in the digital sector to those that are not already in the sector. So we ran our first Digital Careers Festival at the beginning of September, which included a number of community-based events right across the city, but a major event at Leeds Arena, around 1,700 people attended. And we had great support from the sector for that, because the sector actually wants to diversify their workforce as well. And we intend to continue to work with them in relation to that. That's off the back of some work we also did last year, where we did some research into racial diversity in the digital sector in the city as well, again using a partnership approach with businesses in the city and driving that forwards, and using our convening power as a council to drive that. And then, of course, it's not just about working in the sector, it's about being able to found a business and to kind of take the opportunities that exist in that space as well. So the work that we're doing around our innovation ecosystem, we have an explicit objective in that to try and ensure that we work to remove the barriers to entry for high potential entrepreneurs, because they're typically about not having access to finance, not being connected into the right places to be able to found a business. And the only way you can remove those barriers is basically systematically trying to remove them over time through all of the interventions that you make into the innovation ecosystem. And we do that through every kind of aspect that we design into the business support we provide.
Thanks, Eve. Hope that's reassuring, Councillor Galton. Excellent. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I can reassure Councillor Galton, having spoken to people who work in the sector, they're not all hoodie-wearing middle-class techies. And when you do speak to them, one of the things they will say about reports such as this is 18 months is not a long time to deliver something like this. So in terms of expectation management, we should probably keep that in mind. And just a comment, Chair, really, on full fibre. To get to 90% of coverage by 2026 is a great target, unless you're the 10% who don't have it. And those people typically are in the rural areas that surround the city. So often you've got a problem where people after COVID have moved back home, so they're working from home longer, so they can't innovate properly without that technology. And of course, if you are in a disadvantaged community in those areas, in order to access a lot of connectivity these days as well, you really need that full fibre. So as we roll out 5G, I think we really ought to look at whether we do an outside-in approach rather than inside-out. Birmingham Combined Authority are really well ahead with this now. And so as we look to the 5G rollout, I really do think we ought to be looking at those areas left out first as we move towards the city centre.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. As I represent the ward next to yours, I'm well aware both of the issues and some of the imaginative solutions that we have come up with for some more isolated communities around using things like microwave links and whatnot, as well as cabled infrastructure, of course. And I think we'll probably, a fine city like Birmingham is, I think we've got a little bit more of a rural area in our area to cover than Birmingham. And of course, it's not just having looked at this in the past, it's not just rural areas that suffer poor connectivity to full fibre broadband. Some of our high-rise social housing, again, is not often well served. We've got projects in place to make sure people in social housing in the city as well have access to fibre broadband. And also The other area that can sometimes prove particularly challenging is regenerated brownfield sites. Quite often internet infrastructure is based on historic phone connections, and areas that were very industrial don't have great connectivity. So it is all areas we've been working on closely on that one. If anybody else wants to come on this, great. If there's no further questions, I will turn to the recommendations on page 78, and I take it the board is happy with those. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 9, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Leader. And the last paper in my section of the Executive Board today follows on from the theme of digital, really, and Leeds City Digital Strategy. And it's a report around the core business transformation programme, which aims to transform finance, procurement, HR and payroll activities. The council has pledged to be the best place to work with the right tools for the job. And this transformation will bring in technology and ways of doing things that are more joined up, cloud-based and easier for everyone. The core business transformation programme will be funded from capital receipts, which cannot be used to cover frontline revenue costs. Around 50% of the costs are covering the salaries of existing staff who have been deployed to work on this programme. Phase 1 of the delivery will be to replace the finance system. The current finance system has to be replaced because it does not have a viable path for upgrade. Is highlighted by external auditors as needing replacing, and does not have the required financial functionality that we need internally that needs developing, and it has low levels of support as well. So so that's the main things I wanted to pull out of the core business transformation paper, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. As I pointed out earlier, I'm not the greatest arbiter of digital solutions. So my main concern on this one was understanding the value for money, and 10 million quid is a lot. And even more concerning, of course, was that it's going to be paid for out of capital receipts, which tend to be generated all over the city in terms of things being sold off by the council. So we need to make sure that the benefit is felt everywhere. So one of the things I did do, Chair, is talk to some senior officers about their experience of the current finance system, considering that we have a very acute focus on managing finance at the moment, thanks to the economic environment. And I was told in no uncertain terms how ridiculously dysfunctional the system is in enabling people to manage their budgets within departments without some very serious workarounds, for instance. So I'm now converted to believing that whatever the cost, this needs to be implemented ASAP so that we can give greater empowerment to people to manage their budgets and be more creative, and ultimately, though, be more accountable for the money that they're spending on behalf of the public. Therefore, I'm quite happy to support this paper.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. If there's no more comments on this paper, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 121, and I take it everybody's happy with those. It's great. Thanks, Councillor Cooper. And we're on to Councillor Rafique's papers, please, item 10.
Yeah, this paper recommends that 5 high-rise housing blocks across 2 sites, namely Alton Heights and Gipton Gates, are emptied, ready for demolition and site clearance to enable new modern housing development. The 5 blocks are of large panel system construction, were built in 1960s. The background section of on page 2 kind of explains and gives an overview of the construction type, age and condition of the blocks concerned. we've actually carried out option appraisals and considered the cost of refurbishing the blocks or demolition and site clearance to allow for new modern housing to be built. Given the nature, scale and length of the works, structural works involved, both options would require residents to move out of the blocks. Creating new modern housing on the sites would be lower cost and lower risk than refurbishment. It's therefore proposed that all residents of the blocks are rehoused, the buildings emptied and subsequently demolished, ready for development for new modern housing. We've actually carried out very positive resident engagement sessions. By mid-September, when the report was actually written, we've consulted about three quarters of the residents, and they're fairly positive, most of them. And everyone, all the tenants will be offered priority bond and direct status, and they'll be given a home loss compensation and disturbance payments, which currently I think are legally amounts to £7,800. There are 3 owner-occupier leaseholders who will be offered to buy back their properties. The total cost to deliver the proposed activities estimated at 5.3 million. For refurbishment, the indicative cost is approximately 130 million, which averages about 26 million per block. Whereas on the other side, if we're to redevelop, that would cost us about 100 million, which amounts to about 20 million per block. I'll stop there and I'll take any comments or questions on this stage. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rafiq. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thanks, Chair. I know the Old Woodley members have been working hard with the council and the community to solve this issue as well. And there is support in the community. I think the only comment we'd make is the grant is clearly quite welcome to those tenants. It gives them other options as well. But the priority A status sort of raises a few eyebrows. I'm sure Councillor Galton might wish to say something about the experience of his residents who were offered priority A or elsewhere at the Sugar Hill Close, their experience, because my experience from cases I deal with as a councillor is I think the waiting list for priority A is about 6 months. So, you know, is it the case that these tenants are going to be giving a sort of higher priority to get above those who are already in priority A? Or where do they sit in the waiting list of everybody else in the city who's priority A?
Hi, Jez, would you like to come in, please?
Hi, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, normally somebody would get band A for a particular property type, and then depending on the supply and demand in the city, they could be waiting a couple of years before they're rehoused. What we're doing with these residents, should this be agreed today, is to award band A and direct let, and we will then have a team that will work with the individuals to assist them through direct lets or management moves, as they're sometimes referred to, so that we can help them move out as quickly as possible. We don't ideally want to have, we don't want this to take more than 2 years to empty the blocks. It's in entirety, and we don't really want odd individuals left in there as well. So we're also looking at trying to work with residents to phase some of the allocations in there, so that we try and, for example, remove a floor at a time in there, so that we don't have people left suffering from vandalism or antisocial behaviour or anything like that. I hope that answers your question.
Just about that, I think we've recently just kind of done a similar exercise with the high-risk blocks on York Road. So this will be done in a very similar manner. So this is not something new to us, and something we've already experienced, and we know how to go about it.
Thank you, Jez. Councillor Rafiq. Councillor Galton, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. 2 questions, really. The first one is, you've mentioned how demolition of the blocks and rebuilding a development would cost 100 million, whereas refurbishment would cost 130 million. I'd like to understand what it is that makes it £30 million more expensive to refurbish given that for most buildings, according to our own philosophy, we should try and reuse before we get rid of and replace. And then that brings me back to the proposal for the demolition and replacement, because I wanted to understand what the difference would be between retention and refurbishment and demolition and rebuild, because I would have thought that the carbon footprint would be bigger in terms of taking forward a demolition and rebuilding on site rather than refurbing what was there. And when I looked at the section that talked about zero carbon, which is paragraph 30 on page 165, it talks about how the carbon footprint will be measured by what will happen during the proposed demolition, where the site energy consumption will be measured in terms of litres of fuel used, and potable water consumption arising from the use of plant, which isn't quite the same thing as measuring the carbon footprint of complete demolition of 5 huge buildings and reinstatement through new development. So are we going to have a more applicable measurement of the carbon footprint of what is proposed, please, Chair?
Jez, please.
Thanks. A couple of points there. I think your first point, Councillor, was around the estimated costs that we provided in the report: 130 million to refurb and approximately 100 million to redevelop the site. The construction of the sites, the large panel system blocks, requires some expensive concrete work to build in the blocks, which focuses on a rather large chunk of that amount. But there's other things that we need to look at in there in terms of improving energy efficiency, re-roofing of the block, putting sprinkler systems in there, replacing heating systems and storage systems. We are confident that we can demolish and rebuild at a much lower cost than that. The examples that I give that we get to the approximate 130 million charge as well, they mainly focus on the fabric of the building and the services, but there would also potentially be additional costs to keep the blocks decent, such as kitchens and bathrooms that aren't included in there as well. So that's a conservative cost as well that we provided. In terms of the your question around zero carbon, the intention is, if this is approved, is to come back with a further paper detailing what we'll be building there, and we can provide more information at that point, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Just another question. Obviously, social housing is a premium across the city, as we just discussed. So is there a reason why we haven't gone much further on these sites to deliver more units?
I'm committed at the moment to at least replace the units on a 1-by-1 basis. There is detail in the report that we're also looking to take down some garages, which will widen the footprint that's available for us, and hopefully we'll be able to increase the numbers there. It is beneficial for us if we can increase the numbers, because any additional properties we build over and above the 300 would be able to obtain Homes England grant funding to do that. So there would certainly be a benefit for us too. And our desire is not to reduce the council stock that we've got, particularly given the supply and demand pressures, but to try and increase them with good quality, energy efficient homes, which is what we hope this will provide.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this paper? I don't see anybody wanting to come in, so I shall. Councillor Galton, please. I was just about to come to the recommendation. So does the, if there's no further comments, does the board support the paper? I note Councillor Galton reserves his position. I take it everybody else is happy. Great. Okay, we shall thank you, Councillor Rafiq, and we'll move on to item 11, please, Councillor Venner.
Thank you, Chair. So my first paper is on adult social care charging. It's the update we said we'd bring to Exec Board after the meeting in December 2021, where we agreed that as part of the council's response to its funding pressures, we would remove the subsidy provided to clients through 2-to-1 home care provision, and that we would also remove the maximum assessed contribution, which at that point was capped at £482. This was a difficult decision, but the removal of the 2-to-1 subsidy did equalise a difference in treatment that existed then between service users who operated a direct payment and employed their own carers and those whose care was organised by the council. And we also removed an inequity that people on lower incomes with less assets were paying the most they could afford, whereas people with higher incomes were having their contribution capped at £482. So it was reported that a possible increase in client income of 4 million could be delivered from this action, but that was very heavily caveated because it was based on the cost of care packages and not individuals' resources, because many people hadn't been financially assessed to see what they could afford to pay. So as individual financial details have become clearer, a revised figure of 3.2 million has been calculated. And this has also been impacted by people leaving the service. For example, some people have moved into residential care, some people have sadly passed away, and we've also had new entrants into the service. The caveat still applies in that while people have been individually financially assessed, we don't know at what point that funding will diminish to the extent that people are then entitled to further council support, and also the care cap and the changes to financial thresholds will impact upon the impact that's recoverable. However, the shortfall in income is not a financial pressure because of the caveats and the unknowns. We actually budgeted to receive 2.4 million from the exercise. So the financial plan has been delivered and will continue to contribute to sustaining adult social care in Leeds. The process in response to public consultation was that we phased in the approach. So people paid their additional amounts, 25% after 3 months, then another 25%, and then the full amount after 9 months. The paper notes that there's a national minimum income guarantee for all clients. So nobody should be paying more than they can afford. No care was reduced without either social work or an OT review. And Kath, as the director, has the discretion to waive charges or service user contributions if it's judged that it will cause severe financial hardship. So where care has been reduced through a review process, that's provided a financial benefit to the individual and the council. We'd originally thought that 266 individuals will be impacted, and the actual number was 199 plus 55 new service users. We thought 208 people would be impacted by the change to 2-to-1 carers. It was 216. We thought 166 would be impacted by the removal of the MAC, and it was actually 137. And we thought 108 would be impacted by both changes, and it was actually 99. So our predictions were reasonably accurate. A helpline was set up for services to contact us, and 31 people did. And we've offered training to care providers in the use of equipment to reduce the need for extra carers. And while that represents a capital cost, most equipment is recyclable. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Chair. And Kath and John Crowther and I are here to answer questions if people have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor Stevenson, please.
I think, as you'll be aware, the opposition group has made its objections to this, some aspects of this known previously, and I think they remain as it is, specifically around the 1 carer and 2 carer change. I think there's no beating about the bush. We view this as a disability tax. The more help you need, the more disadvantaged you are by this change. With an ageing population, it's not just the people you're affecting today, the numbers just given that are impacted, it's those in future as well. So I think we've made our views clear previously, and there's no change there, Chair.
Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah, just to be really clear, in case Councillor Stevenson didn't fully hear this when I first said it, people who had direct payments were always paying for the number of carers that they needed. Removing this for people who we organise care for removed that inequity. And we're also very clear that it is not in any way in breach of equalities legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. If there's no more comments on the paper, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 196. And I take it the board is happy with those. So we'll move on to item 12, please.
Thank you. So this is the report of the Child Poverty Strategy Thrive. This is a twice yearly report that we bring to Exec Board. And it should be read alongside the community's paper on the cost of living crisis. And we've taken care not to duplicate that paper and for this one to focus on issues directly relating to child poverty. However, both papers do feel very timely, given that we've had news today that inflation is at its highest rate for 40 years. This paper specifically documents the ongoing scourge of child poverty, affecting 24% of children in Leeds, or just over 36,500 children. And this figure will, of course, become higher as we go into winter. The reduction in the £20 weekly uplift in universal credit is again referenced, as it has been in previous papers, because it is attributed as being such a significant factor in plunging families into poverty. The Roundtree Foundation estimated that this one change alone caused an additional 200,000 families to go into poverty. And as I've said here before, poverty and child poverty is such a stark, concrete example of the importance of national policy. Child poverty has risen as a direct result of 12 years of austerity and cruel cuts to welfare benefits, like the benefits cap, like not getting child benefit for more than 2 children, which are decisions, they are choices that have been made and directly impact on children and families. There is also reference in this paper to deductions from benefits, which is happening to a lot of families, usually to pay back some kind of loan to benefits. And it's one of the main reasons given for people approaching food banks. And there's been a cross-party attempt to stop this practice of deducting money from benefits, but it was defeated by the government. We are also, of course, now facing the possibility of benefits not rising in line with inflation. And again, there is cross-party campaigning about this. This paper references the increased demand locally and nationally, which is placed on children's social care as a direct result of the rise in child poverty. There is a well-researched link between being in poverty and being in need of children's social care support, and between poverty and being taken into care, because of the extreme pressure that families are placed under. This is a really significant point in terms of the budget discussions we've already had, because councils across the country are seeing an increased demand in their services as a direct result of poverty and the increased pressure this is placing on families that were already struggling. This paper outlines the work streams that operate under Thrive and the work they are undertaking to mitigate the impact of poverty. The paper references some specific pieces of work, like the fantastic partnership between housing and children's services in supporting 16 and 17-year-olds at risk of homelessness, and the fantastic Send Next Choices event, which was attended by 1,800 young people in June, which was a direct request from children when they took over the Send board a couple of years ago, because they wanted us to come up with ways to help them find meaningful work opportunities. And there is, of course, the incredible work of communities, which is further developed in Councillor Harlan's paper, such as the Heat and Eat cafe spaces being set up in my ward and similar spaces across the city, which we will increasingly need to support families as we go into winter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Galton, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I don't think anyone doubts the awful predicament that is faced by a lot of people working in children's services in the face of the worsening economic environment. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of statistics that are in here, because I have over the years complained about this report in that it's very good at gathering statistics and saying this is how it is, but it's not very good at saying this is what we're going to do. But in the very first paragraph, it talks about how there are 36,500 children currently living in poverty in the city. And then 2 paragraphs down, it talks about how there are 1,306 children looked after in the city. And one of the things that we've always made a point of as a party on the council is pointing out how we should always look after those 1,306 that are in care, but we should never forget about the 36,500 children that are behind them, and that whenever the council overspends in some areas, then there are going to be consequences in others. And one of the key issues that this report highlights for me is that there is going to be a lot more problems coming our way if we're not able to get in early and do preventative action in our neighbourhoods for those 36,500 children that there are out there that are at risk through being in greater poverty as we go forward. And that's why we are so very keen to ensure that our investor save projects in making sure, for instance, we have enough of our own residential care, so we're not paying 2 or 3 times the rate to send our children elsewhere, is achieved at pace. And it's just, I just wanted to mention that now to give context to what some people might think is just continual complaint from our side. But I just wanted to point out that it's consistent and it's driven by a particular need, which is we shouldn't always be focusing on a very few children that we have an absolute obligation to look after, if it means neglecting quite a lot of others that could do with a little bit of help early on.
Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah, I don't think Leeds City Council in any way could possibly be accused of neglecting children or of not investing in preventative work. It is the absolute cornerstone, you know, of children's services practice in Leeds. It's how we've achieved our outstanding rating. It's how we've brought down safely the number of children looked after. And while that number has crept up over the last year or so, it is still lower than it was, significantly lower per 10,000 than it was when we were rated inadequate. You know, we've still got all our children's centres, we've still got our early help support, we've still got a youth service, and that is about keeping children out of care, which quite rightly you've highlighted, you know, it takes a lot of resource, but also the outcomes for children in care are not good. And that is why we've invested hugely and continue to in prevention, where other councils have cut preventative services, because that's how we get better outcomes for children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Stevenson, please.
I just want to pick up on one of those other preventative points. There's education's mentioned partly in the report, mainly around NEAT activity and EYFS, but I think it'd be helpful to see more actual impact of educational attainments and the work that's going on across the city in areas of disadvantage. Even in constrained economic times, there are some fantastic educational institutions across the city working hard on areas of disadvantage and having real success. And although the short-term instruments of the state have been discussed, of course, one of the longer-term instruments that's most effective for helping people out of poverty is to upskill them and help them enter a global marketplace. And within that, some of the great partnerships that are going on between the private sector and education institutions in the city. I think I mentioned before the boot repair company down in South Leeds, which are in partnership with local primary schools to provide opportunities for parents to work around school hours So actually helping people move off of universal credit and into work by flexible work arrangements. And I think as we look at this for next year, it'd be good to see how some of those partnerships can be reflected in terms of outcomes in reports like this.
Thank you. Councillor Pryor, please.
Councillor Stevenson, I think you're right that our educational institutions across the city do an incredible job, but how it links to some of the elements in the child poverty report, I think when we look at the additional things that teachers and school staff are having to undertake, teachers are having to act as social workers, you know, they're having children who haven't been fed. So you're absolutely right to highlight that education attainment is a route out of poverty. But when teachers are having to do so much more with so much less, they're being attacked on all sides. I think since 2010, there's been a 9% cut in per pupil funding for schools. Now, obviously, this is going to vary massively from school to school, but I was looking at one very small primary school recently, which means that since 2010, the government's cut £1.7 million from quite a small school, while at the same time having to deal with all the other elements of child poverty, which Councillor Venner has highlighted. So yes, the schools do an incredible job, but they are being hampered from every side while they do that.
I think it's worth saying as well as school funding, obviously, the adult education budget for people looking for skills training later in life, again, that's running at about 50% of the value it was a few years ago per learner. So the cuts are hitting right across the education system. If anybody else would like to comment on this paper, please. Can't see anybody, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 210, and I take it everybody's happy with those. That's great. So could we move on to item 13, please, Councillor Venner?
Yeah, thank you. There are two components to this paper. The first is a plan to increase the amount we pay in Leeds to our fantastic foster carers. It proposes a 7% increase in maintenance and a 5% increase in fees, both of which are backdated to April. While this is a budget pressure, it is absolutely necessary that we pay this. Foster carers, alongside families across the country, are struggling under the weight of the cost of living crisis. We've not reviewed foster care fees since 2014, and we must remain competitive. We've always been either the highest payer or the second highest payer in the region for foster carers. And this is how we've recruited and retained foster carers, and we benchmark well against other authorities in the amount we spend on independent fostering agencies and external residential placements in the private sector. If we are not a high payer in the region, we risk losing foster carers to neighbouring authorities, especially if they're on the borders. 69% of children in Leeds are looked after in Leeds by our foster carers, compared to 48% nationally, but we want that figure to be even higher. You will all be familiar with the debate that is raging in the children's social care sector at the moment with regard to the absolutely obscene profits some private sector providers are making. It is a disgrace that there is a market in our most vulnerable children, and this is placing such a strain on local authority budgets. The most important reason for needing to keep our loyal, skilled, experienced foster carers is that foster care provides the best outcomes for children. However, it is also the most economically advantageous way of caring for our looked after children. Whilst this paper represents a budget pressure, the risk of not adequately paying our foster carers is that they leave us to work in IFAs or other authorities, or they leave foster care altogether. That's probably the biggest risk, and it's outlined in the survey that you saw that nationally around 50% of foster carers are thinking of leaving. It's also not an exaggeration to say that the 2 million that this will cost is what you can pay for a few placements. You know, figures of £250,000 to £1 million per child per year are being quoted to authorities across the country. The other part of the paper is about ensuring we have a systematic, fair, consistent approach to the additional costs foster families incur for things like Christmas presents, activities, prom. It's really, really important that our looked after children do not miss out on events like prom. and that foster families are able to provide foster children with the same experience that their birth children may be having and that we would want for all our children. Again, this part of the policy hasn't been updated since 2014. So this is an update which aims to provide equity and consistency. It covers some areas like foster carer leave, enhanced payments for emergency placements, and really importantly, and this was a really important area for foster carers themselves, paying properly for when you've got 3 or more children. So up to this point, if you take a 3rd, 4th, 5th child, people were getting 50% of the fee that you'd get for a 1st and 2nd child. And that means that foster carers were financially disincentivized and disadvantaged if they chose to take 3, 4 or 5 children. And we really want people to take multiple children, partly because we have a desperate need for placements, but also because really importantly, it's a way of keeping sibling groups together. Obviously, we need to look at other budget savings because this is a budget pressure not budgeted for, although it is in the 11 million that was referenced in Councillor Cooper's paper earlier. And also that paper outlined the the work that we're doing at pace to recoup some of those, that in-year overspend. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think given that this hasn't been reviewed properly for so long now by the council, I can entirely understand why foster carers have been asking for it to be reviewed. And I know in those negotiations there was some requests actually for more quarterly reviews on the pricing around the year. And I do think, although it might make the headline budgeting more difficult for us, there's probably something in that we don't know at present what prices are going to be in a year's time, or indeed 3 months' time. But equally, that means they could go up and they could come down. And if you look at wholesale international energy prices, for example, and the energy price guarantee and all those factors within it, there's so much volatility within the impacts on household finances that the idea of reviews is probably one worth looking at. And on the aspect of removing the deduction for a 3rd foster child, I think to put it into context, it's probably worth noting that if you're a foster family with 2 children between 11 and 15 and you're a tier 4 foster carer, then at present, if you take a 3rd child, the total fees you receive as a household is £59,000, of which 20,000 is that is tax exempt. The difference you're making here, removing the deduction for 3rd child, increases that to £70,000. And so I think the opposition group would suggest that actually a policy that's more consistent, for example, with child benefit in those deductions, which are less than 50%, it's about a 33% deduction, would probably, given the financial constraints of this, that we would probably suggest that you looked at before jumping to this proposal.
Councillor Venner, please.
I'm a bit speechless, to be honest, by those last comments. I mean, it's a really important principle that people are not disadvantaged or disincentivized if they choose to take more than 2 children, although obviously your response is completely consistent with the fact that your government removed child benefit for if people have more than 2 birth children. I just wanted to point out as well that the complexity of children continues to increase. And most foster carers do not have another job. Their life is foster care. And they are caring for some of the most vulnerable children in this city who are survivors of early life trauma, abuse or neglect, which is why children get brought into care. and that we really need to respect foster carers as the experienced, skilled, knowledgeable professionals that they are. And we need to pay them a fee that recognises that and meets the cost of the fantastic job that they do 24 hours a day in having children, you know, in their lives as part of their family. To suggest we've jumped to this as well is really insulting. This paper is the result of months of work by officers, by the fantastic foster care community, by Leeds Foster Care Association. We've benchmarked against other authorities and against IFAs, and we feel that what we're presenting to you is what we need to pay to retain our loyal, skilled, experienced foster carers who have been with us through the last few years and beyond, in many cases for decades. You know, this is what we believe we need to pay to be able to keep children in foster care and deliver the best outcomes for our most vulnerable children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Dalton, please.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Venner earlier talked about the obscene profits that some private sector care bodies achieve. Well, the only way that those companies are able to achieve them is if they have a captive audience. And this is one of the reasons why we need to ensure that where we can, we have our own carers that we can retain, which, and Councillor Venner has already pointed that out, and that's one of the reasons why making sure they have a decent standard of living is necessary. And that's why I'll be supporting this. But there are some other elements as well which we need to look into too. So in our financial monitoring report, we were told that there was an unexpected increase in care costs because some children were being placed with carers who were level 4, whereas I think the level of care that they needed was level 2. Wasn't sure if I got that adequately explained, but it implied to me that we're very good at retaining people at the higher end of our foster carer skills set, but maybe not so good at attracting newcomers that start at a lower level, where a lot of our need is for the children that come into our care. So I hope that this uplift in fees will enable that to happen, because it's not mentioned here about the complexity within foster care cohorts. It just talks about the complexity of children. So it would be good to get that kind of detail potentially. And then hopefully those obscene profits that Councillor Venner is talking about will be less achievable because people like her won't be beholden to have to go to those people because we haven't got enough of our own. And one of the reasons why they have such obscene profits is because they also provide extra benefits for the carers that come under onto their books to try and ensure that they retain them. So I hope that the continuing conversation with the Foster Carers Association continues to ensure that we are as competitive with others. This paper, by the way, does not let us know how competitive we are with others. Councillor Venner talked about how we're up there in the top quartile, but when I tried to compare the rates that we were hoping to give to our carers here with the rates that others charge, I couldn't actually get it from the papers that were given to us, and there's pages and pages of it there. I would have thought that would be quite useful information to have in terms of that comparator to see how we stack up against local authorities and the local independent sector. Because when she talks about the independent sector, not all of the independent sector actually ask for obscene profits, and we should be working perhaps even more closely with parts of the independent sector that are more reasonable and less associated with multinational corporations and associated more with, for instance, the third sector.
Thank you. Both Tim and Councillor Venner put their hands up. Tim, please.
Thank you, Leader. I wanted to address the point made by Councillor Galton, because I think he was referring to the 350,000 projected overspend on external residential, which reflected in the earlier paper. So at the start of the year, when we make an assumption about the total cost of in-house foster carers, we base it on an assumption as to how many will be level 2, how many will be level 3, and how many will be level 4, and then factor in the number of young people that we think will be in foster care. What's actually happened during the course of the year is that more foster carers have progressed through the payment for skills model and are now at the higher end of that. So there are in fact more level 3 and level 4 foster carers than were included in the original budget assumption. So it's not the case that 350 is because we've got children that would require a level 2 foster carer being placed with a level 4 foster carer. It's just because of the mix of the assumptions when we do the budget at the start of the year.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah. Councillor Galton's right that we want to be spending less money in the private sector, and that's why we've got our Invest to Save proposals around creating level 5 foster carers and creating more small children's homes. Both proposals will bring children back to Leeds who are currently in expensive external residential placements. I mean, I disagree with Councillor Galton about working with the private sector at all, because in my view, nobody should be making a profit out of vulnerable children. Unfortunately, the Competition and Markets Authority review of the market, which was part of the independent review of social care, had the teeth taken out of it. And they made the comment that the market needed reforming, whereas I think most people working in this area think it should not be a market. Moving on to the point about level 4 foster carers, to build on what Tim said, we want as many of our foster carers as possible to become level 4 carers should they wish to do so, because to achieve level 4, you have to demonstrate significant experience, knowledge, skill and training. And in terms of how children are placed, the matching process is about obviously the needs of the child, the experience of the foster carer. Some foster carers specialise in particular areas like detox babies, teenagers, children with disabilities. We're also looking at the cultural needs of the child, the matching with other children in the household. If a child has particularly complex needs and behaviours that challenge, then obviously they will need a specialist experienced foster carer. And as I just referred to, we're creating a level 5 of foster carers. However, the matching isn't as reductive as might be suggested in what Councillor Galton's saying, that you say, you know, you're a level 2 child, you're a level 3 child. As I said earlier, all our looked after children are survivors of trauma. And, you know, their early needs haven't been met and they all require skilled care. And we've got a lot of level 4 carers because we encourage our carers to develop their skills and knowledge to be able to care for children who've been profoundly impacted by early life trauma. So, you know, as I said earlier, for many foster carers, this is their life. They don't have other work. They're very specialist in what they do. And, you know, foster care is a really skilled profession, and we want our foster carers to be the best they can be. So we will always encourage them to get to that level 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any more comments on this paper? I don't see anybody, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on to page 246. And I take it the board is happy with this paper. That's great. We'll move on to, thank you, Councillor Venner, and we'll move on to Councillor Price papers and item 14, please.
Thank you, Leader. So this is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is intended to replace the ESIF, which is the European Structural Investment Fund. It's a new fund which replaces it following Britain's exit from the European Union. So this paper is to seek Executive Board approval of the priorities outlined and delegates authority to accept funding and to authorise year 1 procurement. We have 3 key investment priorities in this. So people and skills, with a focus on core skills and addressing levels of adult numeracy and economic inactivity. Support for business, including targeted support for small to medium-sized businesses. And thirdly, to look at local communities and place with targeted improvements to the built and natural environment. Obviously, we will be using the money we receive to tackle all of these things. Councillor Galton, I know last time this came to executive board, we didn't have the figures and you were interested in those. So it's worth updating executive board that the funding allocation for West Yorkshire is 80.5 million. Now comparing that to the last ESIF funding, which was a paper brought in December 2020, the funding available for that programme was worth 304 million across West Yorkshire. So even though it's a replacement fund for ESIF, the government have decided to give us 76.3% less than the fund it's replacing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I know that quite a lot of the money is being retained within West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but aspects of it are being given to us. And in the paper, it talks about how the council spelt out what its high-level priorities were for the money that it had available to it. And I've had a look in the paper. They are very high level. When do we get to know what the specifics look like in terms of how different communities can access the money in the different spending areas? And then secondly, in paragraph 29, it talks about an MP engagement group. And I'm just making sure that the administration isn't having a closer relationship with MPs than with the councillors as well within the local authority in terms of shaping how that money might be spent in different constituencies. And then third one, sorry, Chair, is in the original paper, it did talk about how there were jobs at risk if the Shared Prosperity Fund was less than expected, but there's no reference to it here now. Does that mean that those jobs are now secure?
Thank you. I can help with question 2 of 3. The Combined Authority organised an MP engagement group as required by the government, and I believe the MP for Huddersfield attended that meeting. I'll ask Councillor Pryor about the other questions, please.
In terms of they're breaking up the money. So 30 million of that 80 million is going to local authorities, of which Leeds is receiving just over 9. The rest of the money will be delivered specifically by WICA. That came out in a combined authority paper that's only just come out. That's why the tables aren't in here. I'll pass over to Eve, who will answer the rest.
Thanks, Councillor Pryor, and thanks for the question, Councillor Galton. Just on the when will communities know point. So the way that UK SPF is being administered means that when we get confirmation of the investment plan being approved for West Yorkshire, the spend will have to take place in this financial year before the end of March. And then in future financial years, again, it'll have to be done in year, which is the main difference with European funding. That means that we in this coming in the financial year that we're in, we will be able to kind of give detail around our approaches as soon as we get confirmation from government at the end of this month or the beginning of next around the detail. But we're working on a range of areas, including, for example, building on digital inclusion, the 100% digital Leeds with the communities team in the council, where initiatives are already rolling, where that money can easily be spent within year and capitalised on that meet all of the criteria of UK SPF, our local council strategy for Leeds, and then all of the criteria for the West Yorkshire Investment Plan and National Strategy.
Just for clarity, Chair, I was just wondering how that 9 million might divide up into the different headings. So, for instance, I'm particularly interested in the bit about place, because that assumes that there might be some town centre investment, but it'd be good to know what proportion is going to what proportion of the different headings.
So we're not in a position to give that detail at the moment, but just in relation to the kind of split of money, it's predominantly revenue. There's only a very small amount of capital, so it's not going to be the same as the levelling up fund bidding, for example, which will be there to support large capital-based projects. Since they announced the UK SPF, they have announced the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which is just capital, which is targeted predominantly to replace it's a domestic successor for the LEADER programme, and the European Agricultural Fund, and that is capital, and that is focused at businesses primarily in rural settings. The deadline for the submission for that is the 30th of November from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please.
I think it's welcome to hear from the chief officer that it's not a like for like scheme. There's all the other pots as well, of course, that are going in terms of investment at the minute across the region. But I think not wanting to, well, 2016 was a hell of a long time ago, but the thing we will all recall is that for some people the argument was always that they couldn't see the physical value in how their money was being spent through these pots. So in terms of the skills work, for example, which is incredibly welcome, have we done any sort of projection and calculation on if we pop 9.3 million in, what are we expected to get within 5 years in terms of value added into the economy and ultimately into people's pockets?
Okay, so just for the avoidance of doubt, the way that the money is being split between the West Yorkshire administration of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and Leeds administration of it is that they are pooling around 30 million of the 80 million to be administered by local authorities, and that primarily is to be focused on pillar 1 around community in place, with a freedom to be able to use some of that money on the other 2 pillars, but the majority of that money on those 2 pillars being administered at the regional level. So in terms of kind of you asking, sorry, I've lost my thread around the question you asked in explaining that complexity. Sorry, councillor. The value, sorry.
Have we done a forecast to calculate in 5 years' time in response to the seed funding? This is the amount we're expecting.
Yeah. So I think what threw me is because you focused on skills originally in the question you asked, and the skills component is predominantly covered through one of the other 2 pillars, hence the explanation about the money being retained by the Combined Authority. Each of the local authorities have had to do a business justification through to the Combined Authority, setting out what we're investing in and why, and that's been through the Combined Authorities process, and we will then have to report on that back to them to give all of the data out back in terms of the positioning. I couldn't tell you whether we've done that over a 5-year period or not without double checking.
Thank you, Eve. Councillor Pryor, please.
Yeah, Councillor Stevenson's right. The remit of the UK SPF doesn't marry up exactly with what ESIF used to cover. In fact, SPF covers a wider range of things. So not only has the government reduced the money by 76%, the remaining 23.7% we've got left actually is there to cover even more than ESIF did previously.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. I don't see anybody else wanting to come in on this paper, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 316, and I take it the board is happy with these recommendations. So we'll move on to item 15, please.
Thank you. So this is the Destination Marketing and International Relations Plan. This report seeks approval of the plan up until 2025. It sets out our objectives to build Leeds' profile as a global city, to promote the city internationally as an area of best practice around where our strengths lie, and also to identify and develop key sectors in the market. So I'll leave it there in terms of introductory comments and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? Councillor Stevenson, please.
Just one small comment, Chair, in reference to the conferencing facilities as a destination. I think anyone who has had the displeasure of being sent on 3-day work conferences across the UK will know that actually what attracts businesses and events in is the collective of say a large arena, conferencing facilities and high-end hotels as well. And so when we look at specifically around the arena and the Yorkshire Bank building and stuff, I think one of the things we really ought to be looking at is how we leverage in the high-end hotel chains as well as part of that can really help boost our economy even further.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I'm looking to Martin and Eve, please. Martin, please.
Yeah, well, I'd just say I think it's a comment well made, Councillor Lewis, and I mean, members will note that in a general sense, we've done good work in terms of strengthening the hotel coverage in the city, most recently with the sale of the final plot on Sovereign Square for a Hyatt brand, which is a very good quality international business class hotel. But there's more to do, and I would recognise the comment that Councillor Stevenson raises.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Sorry, I was going to ask the question. Given the demise of Welcome to Yorkshire and the resonance of the Yorkshire brand, are we going to do any marketing on a Yorkshire level, which would imply that we work with other local authorities, or as a Leeds destination marketing operation, will we be ourselves taking ownership of the term Yorkshire as in our marketing? Because I think that would be a good idea.
Eve, please.
So since Welcome to Yorkshire went into administration, the chief executives of Yorkshire have been undertaking a review of what they want to do next, but the outcome of that review is not yet in the public domain. But yes, Yorkshire is recognised as a really powerful brand. And in the meantime, while we determine what the best way forward is on a regional level, the Visit Leeds team works really proactively with partners right across the region. So we work really proactively with Visit York and Make It York, who we've worked with for a long time, but also with partners in West Yorkshire. In Bradford, for example, have set up recently their own destination marketing function, and we work really closely to ensure that we're aligned together.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, I think, you know, I think the Leeds and Yorkshire brands are very complementary, and part of our advantage, I think, as a city that's slightly different to other cities that sit within core cities that sit within major conurbations, is that we are surrounded actually within our own boundary, as we've said, with this beautiful countryside and you know, great on you know, 2 national parks on our doorstep. So I think we will continue to do that. I think the consideration of the Welcome to York, what happens after Welcome to Yorkshire, as Eve says, is an active discussion at the moment, and it's in the context of, you know, a situation where we need to be working not just with councils and the public sector, but the private sector as well, and come up with something that will allow us to collaborate moving forward. And yeah, that's due to go to the Yorkshire Leaders Board in the next couple of months, and we'll know more after that. But I think there's definitely a desire by everybody to continue collaborating. The question is, how do we do that within the resources available and new government policy after the Dubois review? And that's what will be decided soon.
Thank you. I don't see any more comments, so I'm going to move to the recommendations on page 338, and I take it the board is happy with the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Leeds food strategy, and this report sets out the strategy along with the plans to take it out to consultation. The Leeds food strategy has been developed to bring together the wide range of work currently being undertaken in the city on food, to maximise the impact of the current work and to set the strategic direction for the city from 2023 to 2030. The vision for the strategy is that Leeds has a vibrant food economy where everyone is able to access local, healthy and affordable food produced in a way which improves our natural environment and embraces innovation. This was written and agreed by a group of almost 100 stakeholders at an event that launched the strategy work in January of this year. The reason it's coming from my directorate is a very strong emphasis on carbon reduction of our food that we consume, that we produce in Leeds, that we sell in Leeds, And this is a strategy for the whole city, not just the council, and developed with partners from across the food system in Leeds. And it includes, and I want to thank those partners ranging from the University of Leeds to local producers such as Meanwood Valley Farm, to the third sector, principally food share, and their work in reducing food waste and developing this strategy with us. And also like to big thank you to the children in our schools who were very early to work on the food that they consume, and especially the carbon footprint and reducing that. So thank you to all the teachers and kitchen staff and children that worked on this strategy as well. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Are there any comments on this paper, please? Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. Fair and interest. I'm Vice President of the Leeds Allotment Federation. So local food growing is something we think is very important. But however, we do appreciate that what allotmenteers deliver doesn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of locally grown produce, in terms of the percentage, which is why I was interested in the report, Chair, that it says that 49% of the calories we consume in the city are from within the city. And I thought, actually, that sounds like quite a lot, considering that we're quite a big urban area, and you would have thought that most people eat a lot of bread, and therefore, are we really producing that much wheat? So I think it would be really useful to get behind some of the statistics, because what it says, how do we know that we're being successful? It says, well, there will be some SLAs that people can work to, but it doesn't say what they are going to be. And in the future, our food security means having a proper strategic look at how our countryside is working alongside the urban parts of our city district. And we look at how that looks like in terms of productivity for food, and potentially areas of conflict when it comes to productivity of sustainable energy. And hopefully we can get the people of Leeds excited about local food production, not just thinking about it as, you know, allotments and the odd apple tree, but actually about market gardening and employment opportunities for people in Leeds themselves. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. Polly, would you like to pick this up, please?
Yeah, so just to explain the statistics. So the University of Leeds did a study and looked at everything that was consumed in the city in terms of calories and everything that was produced in terms of calories. It's not to say that 49% of those calories are consumed. It's just where the actual calorie figure matches. I haven't explained that very well. So it's generally what we produce equates to a figure and how much we consume, but those calories aren't necessarily consumed within the city. No, because ultimately it's still, you know, at the end of the day, we're never going to be able to produce things like oranges within Yorkshire. So ultimately we still have a responsibility to produce the amount of calories that we need as a city, or a proportion towards that. And so that's what we're monitoring. I think there's a conversation about, you know, the variety of products that we produce, and that's where we're starting to get more into conversations with people like the National Farmers Union, and listening to what they're asking for. But I think you've got to start with the data that you've got available, and that is one of the challenges at the moment with the food system. Actually, we do have limited data, and so that is something we've got available, and it's a starting point.
Thank you. Councillor Hayden, please.
Also, you know, our food producers do sell to other people than people in Leeds. You know, they do sell nationally and internationally. So, and we don't want to stop them doing that. But we are committed to buying as locally as possible as a council, so that we are supporting local producers. But as Polly says, there's absolutely no way we can produce all the food that we need or we consume at the moment. And we don't want them to stop them selling elsewhere as well.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this paper? I will turn to the recommendations on page 367 and 368, and I take it the board is happy with those. Great, thanks. So we're now onto the communities portfolio, and I'm going to ask Councillor Pryor to introduce item 17, the cost of living update report, please.
Thank you. So this is under Councillor Harlan's portfolio. And on the cost of living, this paper updates Executive Board on developments in addressing the cost of living crisis since the previous report on this subject was presented at July's meeting. Obviously, since July, the situation on the cost of living has deteriorated even further from its already quite difficult position. And that goes from the rising cost of gas and electricity to the former Chancellor's mini budget causing a collapse in the pound, rocketing mortgage payments, and as well as rising inflation. So this report details services such as the local welfare support scheme, who are already at winter demand levels, and those are likely to increase further. The paper also details actions we are taking as a council to mitigate against some of the worst excesses of this crisis. So this includes launching a network of warm spaces for the increasing number of people facing fuel and energy poverty, and I believe that went online yesterday. So at the moment, 22% of the Leeds population is living in relative poverty, and that's 24% of children living in the city, which Councillor Venner detailed in her report on specifically child poverty. The number of universal credit claimants has more than doubled since February 2020, and I know that the government is seeking to withdraw some of this support. For a local welfare support scheme, and this supports residents experiencing financial hardship in an emergency or crisis, this is under huge pressure. Demand has increased by 142% over the past year, with many of the applicants never having previously applied for any support. It is worth noting at this point, and we'll need to make some amendments in the recommendations, that some paragraphs in this report are now out of date. Paragraph 17 is now inaccurate from recent U-turns from Liz Truss, who I understand is still Prime Minister. There are also some inaccuracies in paragraph 10, which is also out of date, as since the publication of this report, the current Chancellor has withdrawn support for gas and electric bills from April next year. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any comments on this paper, please? Councillor Galton, please.
I think there's been a lot of comment already. All that I will say is that whatever difficulties we've got as a council, we definitely are all in this together in terms of there's a big wider issue out there in the city. And I think as councillors, we should recognise that our council employees are in a particularly significant place to try and make a difference, and that work is appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thanks. There's no point latibulating on the seriousness of the situation that we're in globally, nationally, and here in Leeds with the economy. And I think actually one of the things that we really need to be clear and honest with our citizens about is the causes and the expectations as well. And of course, it is global inflation as a result of what's going on in Ukraine in terms of the energy supply and also the impact of the US Fed increasing interest rates. Market instability 2 weeks ago was a result of a number of things, one being on Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday the 21st, the US Fed increased the interest rate by 0.75%. The next day, the Bank of England did the same. The day after that, we had the mini budget. All these external pressures are important because I think we can't fix everything here in Leeds, as we've already said, on our own. And we're going to need some support from national government, some more support, and also working globally. And I think on the points of paragraph 10, I think it's very important that we send a very clear message to residents in the city that the energy price guarantee is in place this winter. We don't want to give any confusion to residents that is the case. And I think as we do that, we ought to remind all of ourselves that it was only a few weeks ago that TV pundits were warning households that they were expecting energy price rises above £6,000, which was clearly not sustainable. And so the energy price guarantee is very welcome this winter, ensuring that it gives support to households alongside all of the grants that have been paid out as well to a varying amount to households. So I don't want to cause any confusion from today in terms of what's being offered. The price guarantee is in place this winter, and households in the city will benefit from that. And of course, it's costly. It's the largest proportion of the financial package. And I think a lesson politically for us all in the times we're in at present is that, you know, the decisions that are taken in terms of finances do have an impact on the market. And one of the problems for politicians of the future, whoever they may be, or however quick those leaders or the leadership change will be, is that we are in a sense all in the same boat in what Councillor Galton describes, because any future government's going to find itself in a very the same situation in terms of its ability to borrow and the reaction from that. So welcoming the items in the report, Chair, and especially the items like the price guarantee that's giving support to people directly this winter.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Pryor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of Councillor Stevenson's first points, I'm not really interested in getting into a debate of why this isn't the government's fault. But on the energy price guarantee, I think it's worth noting that even with where the guarantee is, that still fixes price at double what they were last year. And I don't think residents are confused about how much they are paying for that. The comment I made was that the current Chancellor has withdrawn that from April, and I was quite clear that it was initially for 2 years to fix prices at double what they were last year. Now they will be just be that until April, and who knows from then.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader, for allowing me to come in on this item. And I don't think that the citizens of Leeds need any clarification or to learn any lessons from Councillor Stevenson today, given some of his comments earlier in Executive Board around how we fund children who are looked after in this city through foster carers. I think your idea that the price guarantee is in place for winter may be a little delusional, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, do we? And as we already heard, the price guarantee was in place for 2 years. All of a sudden, it's not in place for 2 years, it's in place for 6 months. Can we believe that? Who knows? Let's wait and see what happens tomorrow, shall we? I think another thing that you state, we're all in the same boat. Well, I beg to differ with you on that one, Councillor Stevenson, because I know that many of my residents are certainly not in the same boat as many of the Conservative Party MPs, or indeed some of the Conservative Party councillors in this place. I don't know whether you've seen any news recently, or whether you've averted your eyes given the failings of your own government right before our eyes. It's like watching a car crash that don't stop. But my residents are in fear of how they are going to pay. One, for food on the table right now, today. Today, can they feed their children coming home from school? 2, will they be able to afford their energy costs? So to heat their homes for them, their families and their children. And 3, how they are going to continue to work numerous jobs, more than one, trying to keep a roof over their head, given the rise in mortgage interest rates that we've seen, and the inflationary costs on everything else. I'd like to ask you this, Councillor Stevenson. Have you any idea what the cost of a loaf of bread is at the moment, the average cost? Have you any idea what a litre of milk costs, or a box of cornflakes or anything? Do you have any understanding of that? Because I think if you did, you would not have made the comments that you have here today.
Yes, please, Councillor Stevenson.
Well, thank you. Typical response, Councillor Cooper. I think the point that was being made earlier was that residents of the city right now want to know what help is being delivered for them from the government and from this council right now to help with many of the situations that you've just described, which are a result not of anything that's happened here in Leeds, anything that's happened nationally, but because President Putin has gone on an abhorrent war in Ukraine, which is causing well, it is, I'm afraid. And if you look globally, it is that the point I was going to make, Chair, in terms of how we react as a city is we need to make sure that we aren't confusing messages. And that's the point I was making earlier about the price guarantee that's in place for people. And I think we need to ensure that all of our comms this winter work in line with all the different government agencies across the city to ensure that people know how to access, for example, some of the support being offered by central government to assist, and to ensure that people are on the right systems. And that's the original point I made. And I think it's a point that taking the politics out of the situation, we could all align to. And on the politics, the Labour Party has had exactly the same agreement and approach to everything that was in the budget measures. There was nothing different. There was nothing different in that. The priority now is to make sure that citizens in the city know what support is being offered to them. And I would hope that everybody across this council could work together to serve our constituents in that respect.
Councillor Pryor, please try and shed some light on this.
I think we will be doing our own comms as a council. We will not be aligning our comms with the government's, given the government's comms seem to change on, frankly, an hourly basis. And as this meeting started 2 hours ago, I actually don't even know what the government position on a lot of this is right now. We can check once the meeting's finished.
Councillor Rafiq, please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with this because there are some global factors and issues, but if you compare the UK economy with Europe, for instance, well, our economy is actually going into decline, and that's nothing to do with Ukraine. This is about management of our economy, and that is actually the government have actually, is to blame, has messed it out. Talking about help, well, we need the help now. We're actually into winter now. We need that help from government. If you go to some of the communities I represent, and Councillor Arif and Councillor Pryor and many others here, you'll find that, we've had 12 years of austerity, and it's been difficult. But believe me, people are, when it comes to finances, people are hand to mouth. This energy issue and the inflation have actually brought people to their knees, and we need to fix that, and we need to fix that fast.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I did try and be non-political and a bit more cohesive in terms of the message earlier, but I just want to emphasise the term "we're all in this together," of course, was made worse historically by the fact that obviously some people are better off than others, and therefore better able to face challenges when they happen, especially financial ones affecting their family. One thing that I do know, Chair, is talking to the people in my ward, and I know that you'll hear it in your own ward, is that there is a real feeling of community in terms of those people in whatever situation they are. They want to make sure that their neighbours and their friends who might find themselves in a worsening position, that they're able to give some kind of practical help. And I know that we've got in this paper talk about having warm banks and whatever, and that's where our community hubs are associated, that we can do so. I just want to ensure that there's also behind that an understanding within the department that it should respond positively where possible to community initiatives, which might not be on their own agenda in terms of how the council corporately wants to respond for the needs of citizens, but it should be receptive to how communities themselves can come forward with ideas that can make a really big difference. Because from what I've seen, the evidence in my own patch, for instance, it's about people working together without really the council to set up a platform for them to do it. It just needs to be amenable to helping them to get on with what they do. And I would hope that coming out of this paper, with the greater understanding of the need that there is there, that we can all step up and ensure that every community is able to deal with and help themselves going forward, because to get a little bit political, they're not getting much help from the top at the moment in terms of the dysfunction. And that's why I'm hoping we can bring this discussion to a draw there.
Thank you. I think myself and Councillor Harland have been having exactly that in the ward we represent, which is one of 33 in the city. We've been having exactly those discussions about how people can support each other during the circumstances we're in. And I do think that is a positive point to make. And I'm sure in the other 32 wards in the cities, those discussions are happening. Councillor Cooper, please.
Well, I do thank Councillor Galton for his positive comments around that, and actually his suggestions around communities helping each other, which is of course what they're having to do out of need. In my own ward, which I'd happily invite you to, Councillor Stevenson, every Wednesday lunchtime, one of our local groups are providing soup and bread free to anybody who needs to get warm and to have some soup and some bread in my community. I know that at certain times of the year, some of you and your colleagues are often in my Temple Newsham ward, so I'd invite you to see the other side of it, and just to see exactly how that local community comes together to help each other, as Councillor Galton suggested there. I think on your other point about Councillor Stevenson, about this all being the fault of outside things happening, there is an element of what's happening globally that's impacted us nationally through financial reasons and others as well. And you're quite right to say about Ukraine and the energy and everything else. But you cannot hide away from the fact that the government a couple of weeks ago made policy that the markets and the economy didn't like. It crashed the economy, and the Bank of England had to come in and save the government's day, the bacon of the day, I've got to say. And they did that for a limited time. They did it for a limited time until the government could get its act together and U-turn on those economic policies and put in place an idea of going forward with U-turning on all of those policies. So please don't hide away from the facts that are before us.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this paper? Okay, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 417. And as Councillor Pryor said, when he introduced the paper, obviously some of the government schemes that are set out in the paper have been withdrawn since the paper was published. So with noting that, is the board happy with the recommendations? Great, thank you. We're going to move on to item 18, which is the annual update on migration activity in Leeds. And I'll ask Paul Money to introduce this paper, please.
Thanks, Chair. Paul Money, Chief Officer in the Safer Stronger Communities team, Leeds City Council, presenting this paper on behalf of Councillor Harland. This report to Executive Board is actually the 6th annual update report on migration in Leeds, and previously all the annual update reports to Executive Board over those recent years have tended to highlight emerging issues globally and the impacts that we are experiencing at a local level. And this year's report continues that trend and provides an overview of several pertinent issues, including the migration-related consequences from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, whereby local authorities across the country are working to deliver the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and indeed working with a large number of sponsors across the city in Leeds who have kindly offered their homes to Ukrainian refugees under this particular scheme. This is quite a dynamic situation. In Leeds, we have around and about 400 such sponsors offering that hospitality, and we have around and about 780 individuals from Ukraine who have intimated an intention to come to the city. Of that 780, about 600 have actually arrived, which is the highest for any city in the region in terms of applications, visas granted, and actual arrivals. We are continuing to develop systems and processes to deliver this scheme. There are and have been several challenges and pressures associated with it, but we continue to work at pace in partnership to ensure as smooth a transition as is possible for our Ukrainian guests and obviously to support sponsors. More broadly, the report references changes to national immigration policy, principally the Nationality and Borders Act 2022, where various elements of that legislation are coming into force in recent months. And we continue to work in partnership nationally, regionally with our colleagues in Migration Yorkshire and locally to better understand the implications of those legislative changes and the impact that has in the city. The report highlights the whole city approach that we're taking to migration and includes within it a range of activities delivered and supported by the council's migration and resettlement team and other services right across the council, and indeed statutory and non-statutory partners that we work with as part of our partnership arrangements. There are some pressures currently in the system nationally that colleagues will be familiar with, and those pressures are being experienced in terms of our contingency accommodation across the city, principally to support Afghan refugees and asylum seekers over the next 12 months. We'll ensure, insofar as we can, that we've got those appropriate partnership arrangements in place to mitigate any of those pressures. Very happy, Chair, to pick up any questions or points of clarification from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any comments on this report, please? Okay, well, thank you, Paul, for bringing the report to us. I will, and your comments on it, I will turn to the recommendations on page 439. And I take it the board is happy with those recommendations. That's great, thank you. And we'll move on to item 19, the anti-Muslim prejudice paper, and I'll ask Councillor Cooper to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm introducing this on behalf of Councillor Harland, who can't be with us today. And I know she's done an awful lot of work on this agenda, both with myself and the teams in communities and community safety around this work. You'll see for yourselves the detail in the report around asking for a definition of anti-Muslim prejudice and the reasons why we're taking a really local approach here in Leeds. We did something very similar when we looked at the IHRA definition for anti-Semitism, and we consulted with the Jewish community and others around what they would like to see in terms of that definition, and therefore any action plans and work that took place after the definition. And we've done the same here with the work around anti-Muslim prejudice, or more sometimes also known as Islamophobia in the city. We have consulted really widely on this matter, and had some great responses, I've got to say, from the survey that we sent out. It was during the time of lockdown and where many services and people were focusing on how to deal with the issues of the lockdown and the pandemic and other crises as well. So we had a great response on the surveys around that. And it was really clear from some of the surveys that came back that there's much work that we need to do to tackle the issue of anti-Muslim prejudice and the way some of our citizens and residents feel and are experiencing life because of it. So this paper really sets out in front of us how we would approach that and to be able to do that. On paragraph 15 of the main report is the definition itself. I'd really suggest that exec board members take a look at that definition. As I've said, we've worked really widely with the Council of Mosques, with the Young Muslim Foundation, with our other counterparts in Bradford as well on this issue, and have ended up with the suggestion that's in front of you today. And I'd really recommend Executive Board approve it.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Arif, please.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst parts of this paper, there is it's sobering to read, but it's not entirely surprising as somebody who comes from the Muslim faith. I welcome the paper. I know a lot of people, a lot of Muslims in the city will also welcome the paper. And I want to thank Councillor Harland and yourself, Councillor Cooper, and the officers for the work and the engagement that they have done within the community. I look forward to the action plan and looking forward to the work we do to tackle the scourge that is Islamophobia in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, following on from that, I mean, one would hope you'd never need a policy like this, but sadly we do. And I think it's right that having followed on from the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, this is the right step. I suppose you would sort of want one policy that covers all forms of racism and discrimination, but the nature of discourse in the extremes today is that you can't. So I guess the next stage on this is to also look at other faiths as well, and look at how we can address some of the racism towards, for example, Hindu and Sikh communities in the city as well. And you'll continue to have cross-party support on that.
Thank you. Councillor Rafiq, please.
Thanks, Leader. I also welcome the paper, and I think given the rising hate crime against the Muslim community, particularly some of the vulnerable members of the community, I think this is welcomed. I think Islamophobia, still there's many people out there don't understand what that sort of stands for. What does that mean? So this is very obvious, the definition, and I hope, this is just a one big step in the right direction. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, but I commend the work done by Councillor Harlan and Councillor Cooper before that and the officers in terms of getting thus far and taking us to this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rafiq. Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. Well, when I was reading the paper, I found it difficult to understand what the difference was between Islamophobia and anti-Muslim prejudice, and I had it explained to me. And then I've sort of realised it's less important about how I feel about the term, and for those people that are directly affected by the issue, and reading some of the statistics in some of the survey stuff that's here, it's worrying, because you like to think that a lot of the problem that you thought was there isn't there anymore. And I think that might be reflected in one of the statistics here, which says 31% of non-Muslim respondents connected to the council were less than moderately concerned about anti-Muslim hatred, compared to 3/4 of Muslim respondents related to the council that were very concerned. And I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's for us to recognise that as people who are responsible. So I'm happy to support the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you. And I think, that there may be, some understanding needed in terms of why the rationale around why we looked at the term anti-Muslim prejudice. Of course, it came from people who responded in the survey around Islamophobia is really around the religious aspect of racism in terms of their religion activities, and anti-Muslim prejudice, of course, gives it a much wider scope. So actually, it looks at a wider area of their lives, not just around the faith that they're maybe undertaking at the time. So access to services, employment, housing, all of those types of things that are relevant as well. It's really awful, isn't it, when you have to say that you need a policy like this to protect people within your own city, because it shouldn't be happening in this day and age. But unfortunately, it's on the increase. Every type of hate crime characteristic is on the increase at the moment. And so as a local authority, we need to ensure that we're making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our citizens and actually set a good example for other organisations to follow, and to work with us as well in partnership around all of that work we are undertaking. And from the point that you made, Councillor Stevenson, about actually what are we doing in terms of assisting people who are suffering from or experiencing this. We're doing much work. There's the Hate Crime Strategic Board that's undertaking a lot of work in different areas, and of course we have to prioritise which piece of work we take first and second and third and so on. And there's also the Race for Equality board, which I chair as well, which is not just cross council working with directors and their teams, but actually it's across organisations within the city as well. So health, are involved in that, as are West Yorkshire Police, as are Crown Prosecution Services. Many other organisations are involved in that work to try and tackle the worst scourges we have around inequality and hate crime.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Does anybody else want to come in on this item? I don't see anybody else want to come in, so I'll just turn to the recommendations on page 498, and doing so, thank everybody who's worked with Councillor Harland and the officers who've worked on bringing this paper forward. And I take it from the discussion we've had, everybody is in support of the recommendations. That's great, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the public part of the meeting. So I'll thank everybody for attending, and then we'll move into the private session. Thank you.